What do you use for your? I think I've asked you this before, but now that we're kind of recording, it'll stick better, and I can hear it again someday. What do you use for, or does it depend on the scenario? Like your rigs, your cameras, your microphones. I mean, are you a Sony crew? Are you Nikon? Like, what do you? Does it depend? I don't even know what to ask about this other than like the brands and maybe like the type of microphone. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, for the microphone, we use always a boom as a kind of the key source. And it's the Rode NTG3 is the go-to. It's the goat of booms right now for our industry. You know, if you want to have a few of them on site, it's good because you can kind of throw a few around. And then for just vocals, for clear vocals as my backup and syncing to the camera, I always have the Sennheiser, uh, just lavaliers. So I always have a lav and I always have a boom. Depending on the production, I might hide it with a sticky underneath the shirt. But the boom for men is always, it's always so crispy. I always go to the Rode for when it's men interviews. Women sound much better to me in lav microphones. But I always do both just so I have backups. So that's audio. On the video side of things, you're right. I mean, it's based on the project. So we have Panasonic and Blackmagic Ursa broadcast cameras for live productions, like events. They got the zoom lenses, so that you can punch in. And then you got the uh, Canon and Sony's for more of the creative stuff, commercials, corporate, talking heads. You can get that really crispy depth of field, um, the blurry backgrounds, the if you don't have like really good lighting, they both perform just these days. They're just so, I mean, they see better than the human eye in the dark at this point, and it's clear. Um, so yeah, the cameras vary. We're familiar with every camera system aside from maybe the Reds, just because that's just like a whole nother level of commercials that we're just not into. Area Alexas and Reds, which are like between anywhere from 5,000 on the low end to 150,000 on the higher end.
What are they using nowadays for like a feature film, like a big production?
It's variable. So all of the cameras we use are all Netflix approved cameras, and all that means is that the same cameras they're using on Netflix movies and TV shows. You could actually Google Netflix approved camera systems, and you could see a whole list of all the camera gear that the the big houses are using.
Hmm.
And it's a huge list. I mean, there's just so many great cameras out there these days. Back in the 90s, it would be two cameras. You'd see a Red or you'd see an Arri, and that was it. These days, you can see brands you probably have never even heard of before.
That's cool that they give you a spec sheet like that. I'm used to seeing that for I don't know, like computer specifications to run this video game or something like that. But it's like, oh, there's so many people now producing content for so many different channels, including Netflix. It's just like, hey, if you want to make something for us and put it on our platform, you got to use one of these pieces of tech to make it look correct.
Yeah, I mean, and it also just gives guidelines. I think it's always good to have a base, for anything to keep the standard uh, to a certain like level of professionalism. Um, it's also pretty nice to say that like, hey, we're using what the pros are using in Hollywood, LA. Um, Not everybody could say that back in the day.
Well, I'd like to have a conversation with you some other time, maybe about editing and production and that kind of thing, because I feel like as a lifelong fan of movies, there's it's like magic.
I mean, it is magic.
Well, I mean, it's like for me, like a magic. I mean, yeah, that's true. For me, it's like a magic. I'm not the only one who said this before. I feel like there's a comedian with a bit on this or something, but I like to not know how magic is done because when I go to a magic show, I want to be amazed.
Yep.
It's the same thing with me in movies. It's like, man, I've been going to movies my entire life, and I'm really into like the theater and like the experience of the big screen and the darkness and the big sound and like the focus. And like when the credits roll, like do you get that feeling of just like, whoa, like what did I see? Like how do I feel? And nowadays there's a lot of movies, like I'm gonna throw out an example. There's a World War I movie that came out a few years ago called 1917.
Mhm.
Very, very good. In my opinion, one of the best movies of that year. It was nominated for a couple of things. I don't know if it won, but it's one of those like uh the whole thing is one tracking shot kind of scenarios. And they do have a couple of edits, but it's kind of hard to see when it happens. You got to kind of like be looking for it.
Mhm.
But it's just like, man, like how far we've come with making feature films in what, when did they start? Like when was like the good old days of Hollywood? Like the 60s, maybe the
60s,
50s?
50s,
Yeah.
60s. I mean, you
The
had
60s.
cartoons that were starting to be produced in the 40s, like Mickey Mouse and things like that. And then, you started getting things like Frankenstein that were black and white, still very well produced, given, you know, that they were the standard at the time. I still go back and watch those movies. There's still so much to learn from those old films from the 60s. Just the storytelling. But to back up to your kind of your question, I mean, the idea of like how I view a film like a magic trick is I see it through two different lenses. Um, you know how like when you buy a new car and you like only see that car everywhere. Like for filmmaking, once I saw the behind the scenes of how everything is made, I have to like before I watch a film, prepare myself like, am I gonna watch this to appreciate the production value? Because then I'm seeing it through one lens and I'm looking at shot compositions, I'm looking at framing, I'm looking at camera moves, I'm looking at color, I'm looking at all these little things that are like nuanced, but then I'm missing the being pulled into the story. So that's the other side of the lens is like, I just want to be a viewer of this and appreciate the film for what it is. Naturally, I still see these little things. So I never get to experience a movie like anyone else does anymore. It's like the magician who watches a magic show. I'm sure you're thinking about these things, but I
Yeah.
can still appreciate the cinema and the acting and the value of what they bring to the full production without going too far down into the weeds.
That's exactly why I bring it up, because it's like, well, in all these years of loving movies, I almost never watch the behind the scenes because I don't want to know how they make it. Like I don't know if it would take away from the final movie or not, but I think it's just more fun for me to appreciate the art form and not be so concerned with how it was done. Like recently, like back during COVID, I started drawing. Like I've always wanted to learn how to draw, so I started, getting some books and some video courses, and I worked with like a tutor for a little while.
Mm.
And it's like now when I look at art, which I still appreciate, like I'll go to like an art museum or look at an art book, it's like, oh, I can identify the mediums that were used and the technique that was used, and I can see like the highlights and the value and like the shading and all this kind of stuff. And it's like with film, I don't know, like unless I get into it professionally, which I probably never will, I just like go into the theater and like, how do I feel when the credits roll? And like you look at, but like back to 1917 or like some other major technical achievement nowadays, like the new Mad Max movies or stuff where it's just like they had for like Fury, what was it? Yeah, Fury Road, the one with Tom Hardy that came out like in 2016. They got a bunch of awards for that one, but it was, I think there were more stuntmen on the set than there actually were actors, and but like they're all playing extras and characters in the scene. So the director and the producer or whoever makes the call gave permission to every single stuntman to yell cut if something went wrong, because that's like how dangerous half of these scenes were that they were filming. Like if anyone saw like something on a car that was out of place or like something that was going to fall, like any kind of danger to anyone, anybody in the scene could yell cut because it was all just like stuntmen. But anyways, like that kind of thing where it's like, what are they doing behind the scenes to just like make the thing that ends up on camera that you see as like the intensity of the storyline? And I, like I said, it's like magic. I don't know if I ever want to know, but yeah, I assume for you, you're trained on it now to just like, what's the camera, what's the editing, like what's the angle, like how did they do this scene, and it just sort of becomes part of what you do.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can still appreciate the film, which is the beauty of it. And I'm not in the filmmaking space, so I'm not also on site, doing these acting productions like live stunts. So I also kind of get to the luxury of just being able to not be fully enveloped into everything all the time. But yeah, that's a it's a fun part of the career path was watching films, old films in film school. Everyone who wouldn't like watching a movie while they're going to college, right? And literally picking it apart.
I think the dream of any classroom is to watch a movie.
A movie,
Just like whenever it was movie
exactly.
day, it was like, oh my God, today's movie day. Like, yes, that's awesome.
There was a class that literally every day was movie day, so everyone loves that teacher and that class. But that was probably one of the best classes because I learned how to depict everything. So yeah.